You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Raina Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. Today's episode is super near and dear to my heart with a good friend of mine, Jacy Miller. Jacy is a wife, mother, and real estate professional, and her faith journey has had a huge impact in the way that she approaches the world. She is dedicated to doing the work of healing generational trauma through prayer, setting proper boundaries and expectations with others, and seeking professional counseling and community accountability. This has been a conversation we have personally had over the years, and I'm just so excited to finally share it with you. I hope it's a refreshing conversation for you as well. Let's get started. Jacy, welcome to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. I'm so pumped to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, so can you just share a little bit about you, what your family looks like, what life looks like on a regular basis?
So I'm Jacy Miller. My husband is Landen. We work in real estate together. We have two little boys. Ridge is 4 and Graham is 8 months this week. Our life is crazy with real estate. We don't really have like normal schedule, so we're kind of all over the place. But it's fun and it keeps things exciting and interesting for us. We also renovate and invest in homes together, so it's kind of like a side business on top of our normal business.
That's awesome. So how many houses do you guys have now? Like, because they're all technically yours, right? And you like from scratch, like gut them and like make them beautiful.
Yes. So the first one we ever lived in, we like had the goal to rent it. So we bought it, lived in it, fixed some things up, and then we found a house we knew we wanted to live in, and we totally gutted it, remodeled from the ground up, which is a great marriage tester in and of itself. And moved into it. And then since then, we've bought 2 more rentals that we have fully gutted, made beautiful, brand new, and then rented out. So we own 4 houses total. And the goal is that we have like supplemental income. So one day we can have a more free lifestyle to pour into our family and pour into our community.
Yeah, that's crazy. I've heard that even with other friends, though, that it was like, if you want to test your marriage, then try remodeling any part of your home together. So I guess that's the perks of military lifestyle, because I just call maintenance and I'm like, hey,
come fix it.
Come fix this, please. Because Joseph and I definitely don't want to do that. We have no interest. I'm just so excited to just share this conversation with you. Or, I mean, we've really had this conversation
so many times.
Over the years. So many times. But I'm excited because, like, now we can share it with other people in the hopes that it just provides hope and clarity and just a little breath of fresh air, because surely we're not the only ones that have ever struggled with this. So let's just dive in. I really just want to kind of focus on like what boundaries looks like and the progression from what we experiences in childhood, then to, you know, now we've walked into marriage and now motherhood, and now you have 2 babies and I have 1 baby. So kind of the progression of like what that looks like and emotional healing for your own story. So to get us kicked off, would you just share a little bit about your background? What kind of did like a healthy home look like for you, or lack thereof? What boundaries were modeled in your own home?
I feel like, you know, this past year I've been working through a lot of this in therapy. Through motherhood, a lot of triggers come up. So I don't think I really stepped into what my childhood and the lack of boundaries was until I was a mother myself, setting boundaries for my own family.
Right.
So I would say I grew up in like a completely unstructured life, like completely no structure at home. I basically raised myself on many levels. Like I would say in the boundaries talk, I'm like ultra independent to a fault
Mm-hmm.
where I do not ask
Okay.
for help. I'm gonna carry it on my own shoulders. I'm gonna do it myself. And a lot of that stems from just
Mm-hmm.
childhood not being emotionally taken care of. I would say I was physically taken care of. You know, my needs were met. It's
Kept
not like I
alive.
came.
Yeah.
Right, right. And you know, I went to school. I did great in school. I feel like my entire childhood was actually like like searching for structure,
Mm.
which is like, you know, stepping into Christianity in college. A part of me thrived for like the structure of it. Like I would say my walk with faith is different now, but in the beginning is like I want the rules. I need somebody to just put some rules and like bridle me because
Mm.
nobody is, and I'm out here just like winging it.
Was it motherhood? Like, was it your entrance into faith? What was it for you that was like a wake up call about, wait a minute, like, this isn't healthy, or that something has to change within the way that you approach your world?
Honestly, it's like a combination of my step into faith and my relationship with Landon. We when we started dating, we were not like in college ministry or with a church. And partially through our dating, we got really involved in a church that we loved and felt really convicted on having sex before marriage. And
Mm-hmm.
we were already in that in our marriage or in our relationship. And we kind of just sat down one day and we're like, hey, we need to put some boundaries on our relationship and we want to wait however long it takes until
Right.
marriage. And that wasn't a pretty picture. It was
Yeah,
really
super
tough for
messy.
both of us.
Yes.
And neither of us had practiced boundaries or knew what to set or how this was going to look, and needed support in that. But that was kind of like a wake up call for me like, oh, wow, I have a man that like wants to fight for me and wants to fight for us and was providing that structure that I was craving.
Mm. Yeah. And that's super sweet. And knowing Landon, like,
Yeah.
it's just such an answered prayer, and we're just so thankful for you guys. But yeah, I can empathize with like the need for structure, but I also think walking into the boundaries conversation, it's so easy to fall to the other side of the spectrum of I have no structure to I need all the structure, but even then it's like in a perverted lens outside of God's design,
Agreed.
right?
Hmm.
Because outside of the Lord's design for, quote unquote rules, you can perceive that from an outside perspective of, well, Christianity and all of this is all about rules.
Right.
When in reality, like following the rules and walking in obedience provides more freedom
Hmm.
on the other side.
Hmm.
I can really empathize with that because that was just a wrestling point for Joseph and I was how do we date well with
Right.
boundaries? Because
Yeah.
especially I would even say outside of the Christian perspective, dating is really messy
Very messy.
and super gross and just I have single friends now that I have that conversation with often is if I hadn't met Joseph, like I would not
Oh,
want to go date again.
same. I could not do the Tinder, the Hinge, all the things. I
No.
don't know how to raise children in that dating environment. It's
Right.
terrifying for me.
Yeah.
But I agree with the like from if somebody was outside of Christianity looking in, I don't want them to think of like Christianity as a set of rules because recently
Exactly.
I've looked at like the law God gave us as like a blessing in the sense that we cannot ever be perfect and that is freeing in and of itself. Like Jesus
Mm-hmm.
was perfect. He followed all the rules. It's freeing that like we know we can't do that. He took it, you know, he took the blame for us, but they've given us, you know, obedience, like you said a minute ago, and like trying to
Mm-hmm.
live like Jesus has been so freeing in, you know, relationship boundaries, all of the above.
Yeah. What was the perspective of your family walking into your transition into a faith-based community? Did they have kind of a reaction to that? Was that like evident in the way that they approached you, or a slow process as you kind of found your new identity?
I think it was like a mixture, a lot of it was like, kind of making fun of me for, we're not living the worldly way. Like, oh, you
Mm-hmm.
think you guys are going to do marriage well by not living together first. You should live together. You should see what that's like.
Right.
A lot of things like that. They said Landon was too good for me. Like, does he truly know your
Mm.
past? Which Landon isn't perfect either.
But that's hard still.
It is hard. And like, I would say that my family has like a mixed view of Christianity, and, several of them like do profess to love Jesus, but for me to like be within the church and like living out my life in Christian community was something beyond that. I still think to this day they don't really understand or comprehend or want to be a part of themselves.
Mm. And that's hard for family, especially as you're trying to include them in that because your heart for them is to share the life and joy that you found, but at the same time, I think it's just interesting because when you look at, like you mentioned, looking from the outside the Christian perspective, because I had that same conversation with several of my family members
Mm-hmm.
as Joseph and I were dating,
Mm-hmm.
that it just doesn't make sense to the world to say abstinence or don't be sleeping in the same bed together, or if you're traveling together, like make
Mm-hmm.
arrangements so that you're not even in the same hotel room, and just like setting boundaries so that
Mm-hmm.
you're not stumbling into death, which sounds dramatic, but I remember us having those conversations
Mm-hmm.
pretty early on, and even with friends, is like, how far is too far? Like, if the line is in the sand at, let's say, 50 yards, our flesh and our just
Mm-hmm.
natural desire is going to do everything that we can to get us up to that 50-yard point. But the point of boundaries isn't so that we get to the 49-yard line and we fall and fail and stumble over that brokenness, but it sets us back at, say, 30, so that there's at least a gap that we can stumble our way not into death. Because there's still consequence and there's brokenness once we do cross that boundary.
Right. And like setting accountability along the way, not just with each other, but within that Christian community. We couldn't do it alone. Like, we were never meant to walk through dating alone, to walk through any
Mm-hmm.
of that struggle alone, because you're right. Like, we would be right up at that 49-yard line, like, let's go. But we need
Right. And towing
friends.
that line, yes.
Yeah, towing that line. And when you have people outside of that, like making fun of you or not understanding at the same time, you have to get stricter with your boundaries, not in like a negative way, just in like a protective way.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the healthiest things that Joseph and I did for our engagement season was really protect each other. And we went through a lot of mess in our engagement season, which will be a story for another time. But I look back now and I'm honestly so thankful for how we covered ourselves, and we covered ourselves in community, because there were so many other voices that were saying, your marriage will succeed if blank. And that blank option was everything but Jesus, which is, I think, a lie that we tell ourselves in so many other areas. Like, if only I were blank, then I would be happy. If only I were thinner or more successful, or I had babies, or I didn't have babies, or if my house looked like this. I think we had to really, not that we never struggled with that lie, but I think setting boundaries as we were dating and walking into marriage, it was so crucial, because our boundaries had to be aligned with what we knew that we understood of scripture and with the wise friends that we had around us, because other than that, we had so many voices that were around us. And even, I think, good intentioned friends that loved us
Yeah.
but didn't understand that what they weren't speaking truth over us. It was out of fear. And I think that is a really big thing in setting boundaries in any of these stages of life. Is I never want to operate out of a place of fear. I want to operate out of a place of love,
Completely agree.
especially in motherhood,
For sure.
because there's a lot of things to be fearful of, even starting in pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you say, as you walked into early marriage, what did that transition to setting healthy boundaries between you and Landon look? And then would you say that you were still trying to wrestle with boundaries with your family?
Well, I think walking, our engagement season was really hard. We were in a place in life where we didn't have a lot of community. We had stepped away from college community and into early marriage. We had just like so many struggles, so many struggles. And so the boundaries kind of went out the window as well as expectations. And we started marriage counseling and just did a full reset. And
Mm,
one of the biggest things that came out of that was setting proper expectations with each other and like boundaries following suit.
okay.
I didn't realize like I was acting out of resentment for expectations that I never set with Landon, and same with him. So we walked into marriage with all these ideas of what marriage would be like.
Mm-hmm.
Me coming from a very dysfunctional family and him coming from a very, very traditional family, and then colliding and just being like, yeah, we
It'll
just
buff out.
step into marriage.
Right.
Yeah, it'll buff out. It did not buff out well. It was bad. Yeah. So we did like a full year of like really hard, really intense marriage counseling and just looking ourselves in the mirror, honestly. And like, marriage is such a picture of like
Mm-hmm.
a picture of seeing our sin face to face. You're never as transparent as you are with your husband day in and day out and thinking, wow, is this really
Right.
who I am? You kind of have to stop and take a step
Right.
back, and it gets really ugly before it gets really beautiful.
Yeah. And it's super messy. I remember very early on thinking, I didn't realize how much of a jerk that I was.
Right, right. Yeah. And a lot of the boundaries I had to set early on in marriage was, I think a lot of it did come from my upbringing. I came from a family that was like really, really attention seeking. And my mom's been married 5 times. And it's just like when it wasn't working for her anymore, she like sought attention elsewhere and moved on. And so that's like what I saw. And I feel like I have a lot of brokenness in that, and where like I had to reset a lot of boundaries within myself to protect myself and my marriage.
Right.
Like if somebody was flirting with me, I stopped going to the gym. Like I took it to an extreme for a while to
Mm-hmm.
like regain my own trust and regain Landon's trust in a
Right.
lot of ways.
Which is healthy. I wouldn't say that that's a negative way to approach boundaries, because if you are self-aware enough to know that if you get anywhere near the 30 out of 50-yard line, then maybe for you in that season it was starting at the 15, right? Like if we stick with that analogy.
Right.
And, it keeps you safe from stumbling over or stumbling too close to a place where you have to bear the consequences.
Right.
So what would be an example of managing your expectations look like within marriage? Like you said, like in your marriage counseling, what would that kind of look like as you're fleshing those out?
Yeah. Like one of the things we really struggled with was like emotional and physical intimacy, like linking up.
Okay.
Landon needed to do a lot of work on like emotional language, and
Mm-hmm.
I had to reset my expectation. One of the first things she asked is like, well, what do you expect from Landon physically? And it's like, oh, I just expected like we got married, he would like want to be physical with me all the time. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, you never said that to me. So
Oh, yeah.
I think being open and honest with expectations and allowing those to be flexible has been like one of
Mm-hmm.
our biggest journeys in marriage. Like, even stepping into parenthood is like, we went back to marriage counseling and talked about what duties are we going to split as a mother and a father? What does it look like to you for household things, for work, for taking care of our kids, and what does it look like to me? And then we kind of drew up expectations of each other. But as our kids have grown, those have shifted, and it could shift by the month or the week or the day. Like, hey, I
Mm-hmm.
know
Right.
things as simple as like, I know I'm usually doing the laundry, but this week, like the laundry is too much for me. I need you to do the laundry all week. Would I
Mm-hmm.
love for Landon to just automatically do the laundry? Sure.
Right.
Is that going to
Yes.
happen?
Mind read.
Yeah, no. And it's like one of my friends told me recently that unsaid expectations was premeditated resentment.
Oof.
And I was like, oh,
Yes.
but yeah, so that is like where we go back and forth on expectations, but like certain boundaries we've set in our marriage is like we don't have one-on-one hangouts with people with the opposite sex.
Okay.
We don't talk negatively about our spouse to our parents or
Mm-hmm.
our friends. That's a really big one because it hangs around. Like in the
That's a
beginning, I would call my mom and vent, and she didn't have the same picture of marriage as I did. And so her advice is different. And, if I'm saying negative things about Landon, that sticks with someone. And so I had to really reel that back in.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've had that conversation with some friends because if I, for example, were to tell you, oh, well, Joseph did A, B, and C this week, it made me really mad. And you, as my friend, because you love both of us, but you'd be mad for me, right? Like
Hmm.
it's that righteous
Exactly.
protection, for your
You're my
girlfriend.
girl.
Exactly. But if I go home and Joseph and I have a great conversation about it, there's beautiful resolution, and then I don't go back and tell you and close that circle of, because in reality it can become gossip about my
Yeah.
husband, then next time that we're all at a barbecue or whatever, you're looking at Joseph with a stink eye because you're like, I remember what you did. And,
Exactly. And you guys are well past it,
for sure.
but I'm holding the grudge. Like it doesn't work.
No, it's a good place to protect your marriage. And it's a simple way to
Hmm.
protect your marriage.
Right.
And you can even apply that to friendships.
Agreed.
It's
Totally.
just protecting the way that you speak about others, knowing that unless you have a safe place where you can go back and say, hey, I'm bringing this to you to seek wisdom, and I'm going to come back and let you know what the
Hmm.
resolution of this conflict, conversation, whatever is, then I would say that would be a safe
Right.
place to continue that conversation. But otherwise, like, you really shouldn't be going to anybody else in terms of marriage advice outside of your husband.
Right. Outside of your husband, your marriage
Right.
counselor, like your relationship pastor or whatever, but like people
Mm-hmm.
that have like true wise answers for you that want what's best for your marriage, not what's just best for you.
Yeah, I think it's in Timothy Keller's book. We read The Meaning of Marriage. I think it might be in that one where it talks about marriage is not to make you happy, but holy.
Ooh.
Yeah. And we've held on to that for a while just because your husband is supposed to be the imitator of Jesus. Iron sharpens iron. So Joseph should be the one that's pushing me more to be
Hmm.
the best version of myself. But he can't do that when my community thinks that he's the
Hmm.
worst thing that ever happened to me because I am not protecting the way that I'm speaking about my husband. And
Yes.
if I'm even going to friends that are going to speak about him or think that way about him, I'm not protecting my own heart because I'm not looking for resolution. I'm looking for a space to gossip.
Yep. Venting and looking for resolution is two totally different
Mhm.
things. And it's like we need space for both. Like I do think we can go to our girlfriend and vent about certain things, but
Mhm.
yeah, we have to protect our marriage first and, what be self-aware
Right.
enough of what we're doing.
Well, can you share a little bit about, you said that your mom has been married 5 times. Can you share a little bit about your dad and where was he standing in this picture as you were walking into marriage with Landon?
It's a really long story, so I'll give the shortness of it. Literally the day or within like 48 hours of Landon and I getting engaged, my dad went to prison. So I would say I stepped into marriage in like a really broken place
Mm.
for many reasons, and that being a huge chunk of it. So,
Mhm.
yeah, he wasn't like present in a way that like a dad should be. And I don't know if I mean, he was present growing up.
Mm.
Like he came to like basketball games and things, but like emotionally, what you need from a dad, he was not there. And stepping into marriage, he obviously wasn't there. You
Mhm.
picture like walking down the aisle, all of these things that you need your dad there for. And instead, he's like making phone calls from prison, playing the
Mm.
victim, like, I
Right.
can't believe you're getting married without me. So I couldn't wait on him for any of that. And I feel like it plays into my faith in such a huge way where, like, you and I have discussed this before. I had to let go of like all these expectations of what a father would be in my life and like give that to Jesus. Like, anytime I read in the
Mm,
Bible, like, we are his heirs, like, we are in God's family, we were an orphan and now we're part of his family. It just like always sticks out to me. Like, okay, like God's got me. Like, if I am looking to anybody
right.
else to be that in my life, like, Landon can't wholly be that for me. My dad can't wholly be that for me. Like, only God can be that person for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taken a while to get there, but so that was, yeah, it wasn't the best relationship through that stage.
What, because Ridge is 4 and
Mm-hmm.
then Graham is 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
I know.
Oh, that makes me sad.
I can't even believe I have 2 kids sometimes.
Oh my goodness. So, walking into, so you guys
Mm-hmm.
got
No,
pregnant.
go ahead.
Where was your heart? Were you excited? Like, were you, there's so many emotions just wrapped up in becoming pregnant, period.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you add on the layer of, I have emotional trauma that I've grown up with, I've been having to heal my emotional and expectations for my husband, the way that I approach the world. Like, there's a whole other added layer
Mm-hmm.
of that because you're immediately starting to think through, okay, now not only do I have to care for this baby, but there's going to be another realm of people that want to care for this baby, but may not be in the healthiest place to care for this baby.
Right. So yeah, I do think Land and I stepped into parenthood. Like, we were in a really solid place. We did the work to put our marriage in a great place. We
Right.
had amazing community, and we went back to counseling and made sure like we are ready for parenthood. But the minute I got pregnant, it's like I had equal joy and this like mama bear come out in me that is like, you will protect this baby at all costs and you are never going to let like any kind of trauma happen to this baby. So I
Yeah.
think from like the minute I got pregnant, I started having to like really do the work of backtracking into my own like childhood and trauma that came through, and what boundaries was I going to set around access to my baby and my child and how I raised
Mm-hmm.
my child. And it was scary. And I think that I defaulted back to that like ultra independence in the beginning. I didn't want anybody to be a part of my birth but Landon. I hired a doula.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, we're doing this on our own. I'll call you when you can meet the baby. Um, I didn't want any support. I wanted us to just be a family unit as soon as we got home, which, immediately I was like, this is so hard. And thankfully, like,
Yes.
I have not talked about Landon's family and all this. His family is amazing, super supportive,
Mm-hmm.
and which my mom is supportive too, and she was helpful. I don't want all of this to sound like I'm bashing my family, but so
No.
like as I stepped into that space, I could start making like proper boundaries with my family. Like, hey, you can't just show up, and Landon's family too. Like, I need you to
Mm-hmm.
call before you come so I can prepare. Like, breastfeeding, all of that in the beginning is so raw
Yeah. I just was half naked for
all the
the
time.
first couple weeks because I was either I'd get dressed and then we'd go through one round of breastfeeding and I'd be covered in spit up and milk and probably poop. And then at that point, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to just wear my nursing bra and my large diaper.
Exactly. Like, you don't want anybody to see you in that stage, but you also do need the help. So, but I do think Landon and I did a good job of like communicating the boundaries. I mean, honestly, it's just like you have to do the work and sit down and see what works. And as things don't work, readjust your boundaries. And I feel like a lot of people push back on it on my side. Like, for instance, my dad is like, I would call him like a functioning
Mm-hmm.
addict. And I have said over the years, like, you can't come around my kids if you can't be
Mm-hmm.
sober. And like, each time he's crossed the boundaries, I've had to reset the boundary.
Right.
He plays a victim card and says, oh, you'll never let me see my grandkids again, blah, blah, blah. And I've said, I love you. I want my kids to know you, but this is my boundary. You know, it's what's healthy for them. It has nothing to do with you. You can choose to be a good grandpa and follow the, you know, the rule basically, or you're right, like you will be out of their life. But I'm drawing this for
Mm-hmm.
my emotional safety, but their physical and emotional safety.
Right. So you mentioned that
Mhm.
you definitely had to reiterate the boundary when the boundary was crossed, which is hard because on your end, you have to be disciplined enough to hold the boundary there, right? Especially because there's pushback. Did you ever wrestle with
Mhm.
like the guilt or shame in setting the boundary, especially knowing that you're listening to the other half of that conversation where they're telling you all of these things?
Yes, I will say like a huge part of boundary setting comes with guilt and shame and am I doing the right thing? And it
Mm-hmm.
is hard to get past, but once you see the boundary working, like in other instances in my life, you know, I set the boundary. It's really hard. There's a lot of pushback. But if it starts to work, if the relationship starts to become better, that's when you can like start to let go of that guilt a little bit and start to let go of that
Right.
shame. But if the boundary continues to be crossed, like for instance with my dad, you know, I've worked through a lot of this in counseling, and our parents don't, like, they expect access to us, but it's not a given.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're adults,
Right.
we make our own choices. You know, it's up to us if we want to have that relationship as adults. And if they can't follow what we need in the relationship emotionally, spiritually, physically, then I'm sorry, but you don't get access to my life. And it sounds really harsh, but it's been like a really peaceful thing for me. Like I mentioned to you the other day in a conversation, like I've been praying a lot about peace this year, and I've always
Mm-hmm.
felt with my family like, you know, I have to show them Jesus. I have to continue to love them through the hard. I have to continue to be the one that's always the bigger person because, you know, I'm trying to show God through me. And through prayer this year, I've realized like God's telling me, like, you can let go. You're pushing
Mm.
yourself so hard to try and be a person for them that maybe they're not ready for, or that they're not in a healthy enough space to be for you. And like, I've got them and I've got you. You can let go for a while.
Mm.
And it's been just like really peaceful for me.
Right. And that's so sweet, but that's also so hard because I think the shame comes from our brokenness. And I think there is a level of like genuine desire that we would be the people that make the change happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, like we want to have some level of ownership over the change that they may find or freedom, but I think surrendering that
Mm-hmm.
power and
Mm-hmm.
like control
Oh,
has
control.
been, yes, one of the hardest things for I think our family to walk through also, as my parents have walked through divorce, because you want to be that image of joy and light in Jesus to them. But at a certain point, it's not healthy for you to even be in the same room.
Right.
And I think you made a great point because I've wrestled with this, but as I've walked into my journey with faith, I've understood that Jesus set boundaries. Like, there's nothing wrong with setting boundaries. And if the family unit is meant to model the gospel, then yes, there's a level of grace to extend to my family members that just don't quite get it yet. But at the same time, there's more grace for me knowing that I can set the boundary because they haven't earned their place with me. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not, I think that's what I kept coming back to as Joseph and I were processing this in our pregnancy is your space in my family is earned, not given.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds so rough, I think, from an outside perspective, but when you've walked through traumatic events with your family or even just unhealthy ways that your parents process emotion, and it's not their fault, you know, like we've both been reading Dr. Nadra's book on boundaries, how she talks about how shame and guilt are going to come. And
Mm-hmm.
she talks about the idea that your parents are just as broken as you are. So now I have more grace
Totally.
when I set the boundaries because I have the expectation that I may be speaking to, yes, my parents are in their late 40s, that biologically they're older, but spiritually and emotionally they may be younger than I am. So I can't hold them to the standard. That means they're going to be in a healthy place to love and serve me.
It's like, especially as far as we get into, like, we're doing the work. We
Mm-hmm.
are trying to be our best self for our kids. And I don't blame my parents for, like, I truly, truly believe they did the best they could with their
Yes, completely.
circumstances. But as I've aged and I see them in a place where they can do the work, they're just not. And it's like, you can do the work in yourself. You can heal. You have your own trauma. You have your own baggage. Like, there is a place you can get to be your best self. And to me, it feels like rejection. Like, you
Mm,
don't want to be your best self for me. Like,
right.
you didn't do it as a kid, and you won't do it for me as an adult, and you won't do it for my kids. And so, I mean, part of my boundaries I've had to work through in therapy is like almost a like cutting off vindictively. Like, I'm not going to let you, I don't want you to do this for my kids
Mm,
because I don't want you to have that relationship with them because I'm doing it. Like, I'm trying to be what's best for them. Like, even it sounds awful, but like, even when they do try, it's like, no, you don't get a makeup.
mm,
You don't get to a do over with my kids. So I'm trying to be like more relaxed in those ways where, like, if my mom is genuinely doing a good job of being a grandmother with my son and I see her reading books to him in bed,
mm-hmm.
I have to step back and think, okay, at the same time, I'm equally sad that this did not happen in my childhood,
Right.
but I am happy that my son is getting this experience with his grandma. And so I had to remove the boundary of like, well, I don't want you to come and do bedtime with my kids
Right.
because she earned the trust. She is a safe place. There is a good relationship there. So I had to back out and let go of some of my own trauma in the
Mm,
process, which is
mm-hmm.
ugh.
Right. Which is equally as hard as setting the boundaries for somebody else when you have to realize, oh, there's still brokenness that I'm dealing with.
Exactly.
And I think that you just hit the nail on the head because as I've watched my dad completely change since I think really just walking into faith wholeheartedly, like that has been such a sweet joy to walk alongside him as like his whole world has turned upside down.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, there's a level of grief because now I'm looking at him and how he approaches my son is completely different than the way that I grew up. And I
Mm-hmm.
miss that because, and there's that selfishness. I think that's what it is, well, why didn't I get that? Why didn't I get this version of you? Because that's not fair. And I
It's
think
not fair.
that's the root of it because I want it to be fair, but I think the redemption story in that is, well, thank God my son gets it. Even if I didn't, because that means
Totally.
we're on the same team trying to make sure that my son gets set up for life in the best
Mm-hmm.
possible way.
And what a gift that like God gave you and I both amazing husbands that are super involved dads. Like,
Mm,
I know you and I have
mm-hmm.
shared this with each other before. Is like, how healing has it been to see my husband be the dad that like I wanted growing up, and to
Exactly.
see him love his kids so well and to be so involved and to be an equal partnership with me on so many levels. Like, it has taken, like, I mean, we have fought for it. We have been on our knees praying day after day after day in some seasons of our life, but it's been healing to see the outcome. It's like, even though I didn't have this growing up, I can make it.
Mm,
Like, it can still be for me, no matter the age.
yeah, and you're totally right. Like I remember thinking back to when because I had a C-section, wasn't planned, and that recovery just completely threw me off. So I came
Mm-hmm.
home and then we had to make the drive up to Dallas a couple days later, which I would never recommend post birth by a couple days. Maybe we'll do it
Never.
different next round. But all that to say, I I couldn't even like brush my hair or like move my arms up above my head to wash my hair for my first shower. So Joseph had to hold my trunk and basically bathe me. Like there's no, take out all the intimacy or however people want to portray that, but it was pure. I remember just thinking in the shower, like, I cannot physically hold myself up and stand, much less brush my hair, wash myself. I'm still covered in blood, all of
Mm-hmm.
the hospital stuff from the surgery. And my husband is literally without complaint serving me in the best way that I could have imagined. And
Amazing.
I'm so thankful for that because there's so many people that don't have that story.
100%.
So it has been sweet to, in the midst of grieving everything that my family and parents weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And even so, they're growing and there's grace for them and they're working really hard,
Mm-hmm.
But it's just been such a sweet reminder from the Lord that, hey, I haven't forgotten about you as you
Mm-hmm.
try and do the work because you feel lonely.
Even in this conversation, when you called me to want to do this podcast, I had been
Mm-hmm.
really, really struggling. Like, I've been setting boundaries for years and years and years with my family, and I was just in like a pit of like, it's not working in some areas, and like
Mm,
trying to
right.
be okay with that. Like, I I can't be someone's redemption story, and that's okay. But when you called to
Yeah.
talk, you were like, "Hey, do you want to talk about boundaries?" I was like, "You know what? This is God's little gift to me. Like, hey, I see you. You're
Mm,
doing the work. Like, you know, you just feel seen, and like, okay, maybe somebody wants to hear my perspective on this. Maybe I'm doing something right."
yeah, and it's great. So, what has it looked like in motherhood for you? Because again, now
Hmm.
you have two babies. What does it look like for you in your own heart to set boundaries and manage expectations, especially now in the
Oh,
transition from one to two?
yeah, the transition from one to two really just like kicked my butt. I was not ready. I really, really struggled with postpartum anxiety and depression this time. So really I had to take a step back and think like, okay, I cannot be everything for my kids right now. I have to take care of myself or I'm spiraling to a level that's like
Right.
not safe for me. So I really had to like dig into therapy and figure out where this anxiety was coming from, figure out if I needed
Mm-hmm.
meds or, whatever. And really just grounded myself. I had to ground myself back to Jesus and, just like simple as like going outside and putting my bare feet on the ground, like
Mm-hmm. Yes, we
really
talked about
grounding
that.
myself. Yes. And realizing that like I am not going to be enough for Ridge. It's really hard for
Mm,
me to not give him everything he needs in a level that I could before having Graham. And it's
right.
like, wow, I don't have enough of me to go around.
That's humbling.
It is. It's so humbling. And having a career at the same time. And, I just can't do it all. And I didn't realize how much of my worth I had put into being a good mom and being good at my job until a second baby came around and was like, hey, you're mediocre at all of this. That's how I felt, at least. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I kind of had to reset my expectations all the way around of like, I cannot get it all done in a day. I cannot fully be there emotionally and physically for my kids in a way that I was before. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. And I just need to refind my balance. And Landon and I had to really refine our balance together. And we just had to totally change up our schedule and our parenting. And I feel like that is parenting in general is like
Mm-hmm.
you cannot be strict on what you think it's going to be. You have to be flexible. And like when certain things don't work, you got to be able to see, like, okay, well, what does work?
And I imagine that changes from one to two kids too.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, man, I can't even explain all the changes, but I'm trying to think within boundaries. Like, when I got pregnant with Graham, all of those same feelings came back, which is probably the anxiety as along with like the mama bear. And
Mm-hmm.
I really had to look back through all of my emotions and the boundaries I wanted to set with family, and just that protectiveness came back around,
Mm-hmm.
just when you feel like, okay, we're settling
Right.
in, here comes another one, and you feel it all over again.
Yeah. And I think back to I think it was a Instagram post you had sent me or we had talked about it. And in the realm of managing expectations, on one side of the column it was all of the things for
Hmm.
pregnancy and postpartum that you talk about with your spouse or with family, and then on the other side it was like these are all of the things that you should have talked
Oh
about
my gosh,
for
yes.
pregnancy and postpartum. And on the left side, it was like, what color are we going to paint the nursery? What kind of theme do we want? What do we want for the baby shower? What dresses do I want for my maternity shoot? And then the other side, it was, what roles are we each partner going to take for the night shift, for the day shift,
Hmm.
or change our career paths? Or is one of us going to stay home? Do we have the financial means to cover childcare?
Yeah, what kind of childcare do you want?
Yes.
So many things come up that like you didn't even realize until you're in it, and it's like the rawest time of your life. I've never been more tired in my entire life than like losing sleep with two kids instead of
Mm,
one, and I was just as tired before. It just feels even more
right.
now. But I mean, I think we have to really prioritize those things with ourselves first. We cannot be a good mom if we're not being good to ourselves. And that means taking care of ourselves spiritually, emotionally, physically, and then taking care of our partnership. I mean, if our marriage isn't
Mm-hmm.
like good, if we're not in good relation with each other, we're not able to be a good team for our kids either.
I love how you shared just circling back on marriage because I think that can get so lost in the new baby season. Because even Joseph and
Mm-hmm.
I have had to reevaluate how do we love and serve
Mm-hmm.
each other, because I have to love and serve myself to make sure I can get out of bed and do regular human things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to feed into my husband
Right.
because he is also my partner and doesn't, knock down any on the pedestal of undeserving of my love just because we have kids. I think we have had to fight for our marriage more in the midst of stepping into motherhood.
Oh, yeah, totally. And it's like, it's so easy.
Like, what are some of the tangible ways that you've had to set boundaries for yourself personally to be the healthiest version of you?
Yeah. So I think Landon and I have done a good job of like, we have made space for each other to go take care of ourselves physically. If he wants to go work out, like I'm totally fine with whatever hour he chooses to do that. He's been great with like several mornings a week. I go run, I get out of the house. I don't take the kids in the stroller with me. It's this mommy time,
Just you.
just
Yeah.
me, and I do what I need. I We've tried to make space for each other to have like time in the Word, or just time to go read a book or go sit in solitude. I'm trying to keep myself in community. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I can isolate easily, especially with anxiety. I would rather just like cut everybody out instead of like do the work and continue friendships, which,
Right. And put yourself out there.
yes. So that's something that I'm trying to. It's the same as marriage, I don't want to lose all my friendships in motherhood either. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to be aware of those relationships and how, I can still continue those within motherhood. It looks different. I'm not going out to dinner every night, but
Yeah.
you want to go to the grocery store together or whatever. Yeah, making space for that. And then honestly, like going to therapy when I need it. It's important. And it costs money, and I know we're privileged that that is even an option
Mm-hmm.
for me. But that I've always circled back to therapy and community being something that is God's gift to me,
Mm,
and that really grounds me back in like wisdom and support that I need to move forward.
yeah, I love that you pointed that out because I was just going to ask what were some of the things that you would say in terms of setting healthy boundaries and expectations. Where would you start? And it sounds like the overall theme of this whole conversation was go to therapy. Please go talk to
Mhm.
somebody for your mental health and have people around
Mhm.
you that love you and are going to point you in the right direction and are going to be the ones that either show up at your house with meals or
Mhm.
are going to come over and say, "Hey, you look horrible. You haven't showered. Please go shower." And I'll watch the babies because I've had friends have to do that with me or a date night, you know?
Yeah, so that was what I was going to say next is like Landon and I, the beginning of each year, we set like goals together, and we'll set like financial goals, spiritual goals, marriage goals. And one of those things we have like had to stick with is a date night, having a regular date night. It was really hard for me to leave Ridge with babysitters in the
Yeah,
beginning. I
same.
had to let go of that a little bit, like find the people I trust and then trust them and go spend time. You have to. And one of the biggest things I learned in counseling is like leaning into truth instead of fear. Can Landon keep Graham on his schedule? Is he going to feed him? Is he going to do that? Like, the truth is, my husband is a capable father, and my child will be taken care of. And I need
Right.
to lean into the truth and I need to walk that out. And when I come home, everything's fine. He may do
Mm-hmm.
it differently, but
Yes.
everything's fine. And the overall theme we're talking about, you're right, it is therapy if you need it, when you need it, however you need it. Surrounding yourself with people that are willing to speak truth into you, that are willing to hold you accountable, that you will allow to hold you accountable. And just, yeah, being in a loving and supportive environment and wanting that for yourself and your family.
Yeah, that's so good. And I'll even go as far as saying, I think medication, I'm not going to discredit Western medicine. Like,
Yeah.
I have so many friends that have flourished on mental health support through medication. And the other, I guess, disclaimer I'll put out there, because I didn't realize this until I went to go see my primary care physician a couple weeks ago, that the postpartum window isn't the first 6 weeks. The postpartum window is actually 1 to 3 years.
Crazy.
So I think if we even just had the expectation as mothers that, hey, I don't have to have my life back together,
100%.
even by the first year, I think mentally I even set the marker on the wall to be good or like back to shape or, mentally a mom superhero by 1 year. He's almost 2 and still slightly drowning. But,
Totally.
I found a counselor that I love and I'm back in community and I'm telling friends that I'm sad or that I'm anxious or, hey, please come over so I can go work out. And I think you made a good point of vulnerability. Like
Yes.
vulnerability, the other side of that is accepting the help and accepting the support. It's
Hmm.
one thing to share that you're struggling, but the other half of that is willing to accept the support.
Yeah, it's taken me years to fully learn that. And I think that the anxiety in this second birth like really forced me into that. Like I have to accept the help because I genuinely can't do it right now. Like I can't do it all. And that's okay. And you're right, with the postpartum journey, I didn't feel myself again until Rich was 3 years old.
Right.
And then I got pregnant again. It's like, I think we're going to have this constant journey in motherhood of relearning our body and what our body's capable of and why we
Mm-hmm.
love our body. And then going through, our emotions as we're raising our kids. Even if you had the most normal childhood, I still think you're going to have triggers within motherhood of things that like it's the same as marriage. It's a mirror of
Right.
your own sin. When my son acts exactly like me, I'm like, oh, I've got
Yeah.
some work to do. I gotta work on myself in this. I gotta reset my expectation of myself in this.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great point. I think one of my dad's favorite quotes early on has been, how ugly do our sins look when they're committed by others?
Ooh,
Yeah.
So good.
And I think that's just a helpful reframe going into parenthood, whether you have one baby or two babies or you're praying for babies, is that if you are doing the work or you cannot manage your emotions as an adult, as like a grown human, then there needs to be a little bit more grace when you approach your small human.
Totally.
Because they don't have the tools that maybe you do, or you're learning, or, you know, going back to our parents, I think our parents did the best they could. And I know that they love and care for us, but maybe they didn't have the tools that we now have access to. So we have to manage our expectation of what those relationships will look like.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like we have a different toolbox than they didn't even have available to them. And it's up to us to use it and to guide our kids in that way and to give them the tools early on. Like we're stopping certain parts of generational trauma, and it's up to us to take on that responsibility.
And I think that that's the beauty of the gospel in the midst of this conversation is we believe at the end of the day we're not perfect, but we believe in a God that is perfect and was perfect and will fill the gaps.
Yes.
Of all of our brokenness.
Yeah. What would we do without him, right? Like I have never felt more loved and more at peace in those moments of like feeling like I'm dying in childbirth. I'm like, that's the closest I've ever been to Jesus. And people are like, oh, because it was like so sweet with the baby. I'm like, no, I felt like I was dying. Genuinely. And in the depths of despair and marriage and motherhood struggles, it's like how much better it can be with him.
Right. And I think there's just been such a wealth of wisdom shared over this call. But as we close up, I want to close with one more question, because the premise of this podcast is just to continue to share wisdom that, we've had this conversation over the years, but to continue to share truth over our younger selves and for our future selves. So if you could provide wisdom to your younger self or our community that is listening, what closing wisdom would you share?
Community is so important, and allowing yourself to be loved by others while learning to love yourself along the way is really healing, and this is hard.
No, it is. Community, I think, at least for me, having people in your corner to see the aspects of yourself that you don't want to see, or you just need support in walking towards healing.
Right. Yeah. It's like asking for support and then being willing to do the work that support provides, I think is my biggest lesson through all of these stages of life we just discussed.
Yeah. Jacy, you're awesome. I love you.
I love you. I'm so glad we had this talk. I feel like it's, we've had it so many times.
And I'm glad that our community gets a piece of it. So as we finish up, where can our community connect with you? You guys are in real estate, so let's just put the plug there.
If anybody wants to buy or sell their house, if you want help figuring out how to renovate your house, you can find Landen and I. He's a realtor with Century 21 Judge Fight. You can just look him up, Landen Miller, Century 21 Judge Fight, and it'll pull up all of our information. You can find us both on social media. But yeah, we have a passion for helping people find their forever home, their next home, their investment. I love talking to people about their finances and how to set up a budget and how to invest. So if anybody wants to reach out for guidance in that way too, we're always willing and able.
Yes, and we're big supporters of them. If it weren't for the Army guys, we would be living in one of Jacy's houses. That's how much we love them. But I appreciate you. I'm so thankful for you, for your wealth of wisdom and your family.
I love you.
So thank you just for sharing this. Yeah, thanks for sharing this space with us. And we'll see you guys on the next episode. This episode of If Only I Were Wiser has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more episodes so you don't miss any encouragement. And don't forget to rate and review so we can continue to build our community and share more about topics that will be healing and helpful for you. See you in the next episode.